Alcoholic beverages. Beer is an alcoholic beverage produced by fermentation. Production process: beer brewing: germinated grains, malt, dried and ground, mixed with water at 3 temperatures of 40 to 50 Celsius degree, 65 to 70 Celsius degree for starch and protein to be converted into sugars and amino acids, and at 75 Celsius degree to inactivate enzymes, separating the residue, beer wort, to get the malt juice, boiling for no more than 2 hours to concentrate and sterile, then combined with female, unpollinated houblin flowers, add flowers 3 times, to create a characteristic bitter taste and help preserve beer, separating houblin residue, cooling, ale beer at 15 to 23 Celsius degree, lager beer at 7 to 12 Celsius degree, fermenting, add yeast, yeast combines with sugar to create ethanol and CO2, can add more sugar, fermentation process helps create flavor and prolong beer storage time, ale beer ferments for about 1 week, lager beer for about 2-3 weeks, can add other flavors to diversify beer product, aging, at 0 to 2 Celsius degree for a few weeks to 1 month, to settle the yeast and enhance the flavor, filtering and adding finings, CO2 saturation, bottling, pasteurization, to inactivate microorganisms and enzymes in beer to help preserve beer. Reference: most of the world's beers fall into one of 2 main styles, ale and lager. The difference between these 2 styles mainly comes down to the type of yeast used in the production process. Along with that, the way these 2 beers are fermented is also different. While ales use the surface fermentation method, lager beer uses the bottom fermentation method. The yeast used for ale is called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is a yeast that has been discovered since ancient times and is widely used in many food industries, such as winemaking or bread making. This type of yeast is relatively stable and stable to changes in environmental factors, such as temperature, humidity, high alcohol content. For that reason, ales are usually fermented at a warm temperature, around 15 to 23 Celsius degree. This type of yeast is a surface fermenter because it will initially flow to the top and then gradually sink to the bottom of the barrel when the fermentation is finished. This is a fast-growing and prolific yeast, so the production of ale takes place in a very short time, only about 1 week. Meanwhile, the yeast used for lager beer is called Saccharomyces vivarum, a yeast that has only been used to brew beer since the Renaissance, 15th century, which began in Bavaria, Germany. This type of yeast is weaker and more easily affected by environmental factors. It requires fermentation and storage at cold temperatures, so special equipment is required to produce this beer. This is also the reason why lager beers only became popular in the 20th century, when refrigerators and coolers were introduced. The yeast used to make lager beer is bottom fermenting, which means that the beer ferments inside the beer mix and then sinks to the bottom when the fermentation is over. People often think of this as bottom to top fermentation, but this is not true. It's just that this type of yeast has never been able to rise to the surface, which is why it got its name. Moreover, in the past, beer tanks were often opaque, so no one could see what was going on at the bottom of the barrel. Because of the influence of cold temperatures, the fermentation time of lager beer takes place quite slowly, usually taking 2 to 3 weeks, even months. Differences in taste between ale and lager. The method of fermentation and the type of yeast used to make these 2 beers also makes for obvious differences between ale and lager. The most prominent of which are the alcohol concentration, sweetness, bitterness of hops, aroma, and the way to preserve and enjoy them. Alcohol content. We all know, brewer's yeast plays a key role in the formation of beer's alcohol content. Yeast gives beer alcohol, but high alcohol kills yeast. Because ale's yeast is strong and stable, it is more resistant to alcohol levels. Meanwhile, the yeast alcohol content. We all know, brewer's yeast plays a key role in the formation of beer's alcohol content. Yeast gives beer alcohol, but high alcohol kills yeast. Because ale's yeast is strong and stable, it is more resistant to alcohol levels. Meanwhile, the yeast of lager beer is weaker and can only survive in a low alcohol environment. For that reason, ales often have a higher alcohol content than lager beers. Lager beers are generally between 4 and no more than 5.5% alcohol, while ales can be very high, ranging from 6 to 8%, even exceeding 10% in the case of some beers. Example: excellent Belgium beer. Hops. The composition of hops present in ales and lagers is quite different. Since ales are fermented at high temperatures, people often add more hops to use them as a natural preservative. As a result, ales often have a denser taste, more pronounced fruit aromas, but often higher bitterness. Meanwhile, due to being fermented at cold temperatures, lager beers require less hops. Furthermore, hops. The composition of hops present in ales and lagers is quite different. Since ales are fermented at high temperatures, people often add more hops to use them as a natural preservative. As a result, ales often have a denser taste, more pronounced fruit aromas, but often higher bitterness. Meanwhile, due to being fermented at cold temperatures, lager beers require less hops. Furthermore, due to prolonged exposure to yeast, some very subtle and light flavors of hops can be evident in lager beer. Ingredients of beer. The main ingredients of beer in general include water, grains, yeast, and hops. These are the only ingredients used to make beer, as defined in the German Reinheitsgebot Purity Code from 1516. Perhaps because of this, lager beer, which originated in Germany, tends to be used exclusively the above ingredients. Lager beers have almost kept their original flavor. They are bright, refreshing beers with subtle, smooth, easy to drink flavors. Meanwhile, ales are usually not limited by the above regulations. This allows different regions to have beers with different, unique styles and flavors, using local ingredients. People sometimes also add other ingredients to the beer mix, such as fruit flavors, or use wheat instead of malt. Brewers are free to be creative without any limitations. Thanks to that, today we have a diverse, rich world with hundreds of beers with their own distinctive flavors and aromas. Beer taste in general. Although there is a relatively large difference between lager and ale, the exact taste of the two beers depends a lot on the quality of the ingredients, the type of flavor additives, and the brewer's own know-how. However, we can generalize a few things in common about the taste of these two beers. Ales tend to be bolder, with more opaque color, higher alcohol content, and strong, pronounced flavors. Its bitterness is often also higher due to the greater amount of hops used. Meanwhile, lager beers are usually light, with clearer color, lower alcohol, sweeter taste, easy drinking, and high refreshment. Beer storage. The storage place must be clean and dry. Dampness can damage the carton and rust the bottle cover. Avoid direct sunlight on the beer. Lights should be turned off when not needed. Bottles are often dark in color for this reason. Draft beer does not keep for a long time. Canned beer and bottled beer is best consumed within 6 months from the date of manufacture. Ensure first in, first out, FIFO, and beer within expiry date. Service beer. A. Temperature. Beer should be stored in the refrigerator about 4 to 6 Celsius degree. Beer temperature when serving is usually between 4 to 7 Celsius degree. Europeans often drink beer at a slightly warmer temperature than Americans. Beer is too cold, less foam and not aromatic and looks cloudy. Beer is too hot, has a lot of foam, lacks freshness, and has too much alcohol taste. B. Glass. Should be chilled, right type, clean, no grease stains. Dirty glasses make beer tasteless, less foamy. C. How to pour beer. Make a layer of foam on the top of the glass about 2 to 3 centimeters. Can tilt the glass 45 degrees when pouring. Change a new glass when serving a new beer. D. Serving. Check bottles, cans, beer labels and bottle openers. Do not hold the rim of the glass, use a coaster when serving. Do not shake beer bottles and cans. Domestic guests, open beer bottles, beer cans in front of guests. Foreign guests, can be opened in the counter. Popular foreign beer brands in Vietnam: Heineken, Holland, Pilsner, Czech, Tiger, Singapore, Kronenbourg, France, San Miguel, Philippines, Asahi, Japan, Carlsberg, Denmark, Tsingtao, China, Forsters, Australia, Singa, Thailand, Tuborg, Denmark, Guinness, Ireland, Budweiser, USA, Corona, Mexico.